The snow was falling outside our bedroom window when I found the receipt tucked inside Marcus's wallet, and for a moment, I thought it was for my Christmas present. Victoria's Secret, December 15th. Size small lingerie set in red lace. I'm a size large, and I haven't worn red since our wedding day, 8 years ago, because Marcus always said it made me look washed out. My hands trembled as I read the receipt again, hoping somehow the numbers would rearrange themselves into something innocent, something explainable, but deep down, in that hollow place where wives store their worst fears, I already knew. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The bedroom door creaked open behind me, and I heard Marcus humming some Christmas song under his breath. Probably Silent Night, because he always hummed it while wrapping presents in the garage. I slipped the receipt back into his wallet and pretended to fold laundry, my heart hammering so loud I was sure he could hear it from across the room. When he kissed the top of my head and said he was running errands, I just nodded and smiled like I'd been doing for months, maybe years, whenever something felt wrong but I couldn't quite name it. It wasn't until I heard his truck pull out of the driveway that I finally understood why my sister Claire had been avoiding eye contact at Thanksgiving dinner, why she'd suddenly started wearing makeup to our casual family gatherings, and why every time I mentioned Christmas plans, both of them got that same tight expression around their eyes like they were sharing a secret that burned. I am Karen White, and this is the story of how I discovered that the two people I trusted most in the world had been planning my humiliation for months, and how I made sure their Christmas morning became something they'd never forget. But not in the way they expected. The worst part wasn't finding the receipt. The worst part was realizing that I'd been making excuses for them for weeks. Marcus working late at the auto shop, even though December was always their slowest month. Claire canceling our sister coffee dates, claiming she was too busy with her new job at the insurance company, the same job she'd been complaining about since summer. The way they both seemed to light up whenever I left the room during family gatherings, like they'd been holding their breath waiting for me to disappear. I sat on the edge of our bed, still holding that damn receipt, and tried to remember the last time Marcus had looked at me the way he used to. Really looked at me, not just the quick glances over his morning coffee or the distracted nods when I talked about my day at the elementary school where I taught 3rd grade. We'd been together since I was 19 and he was 21, married at 23, and somewhere along the way I'd become invisible in my own life. Claire was my younger sister by 3 years, and she'd always been the pretty one, the fun one, the one who got attention without trying. I'd made peace with that long ago. Or so I thought. She'd been living in our guest room since August after her landlord sold her apartment building. Marcus had suggested it, said family should help family, and I'd agreed because that's what good wives do. They support their husbands' decisions, even when those decisions feel like swallowing glass. The guest room shared a wall with our bedroom, and now I understood why I'd been hearing footsteps at odd hours, why the shower had been running when I left for work in the mornings, even though Claire supposedly didn't start her shifts until noon. How many mornings had I made coffee for 3 people, never questioning why Claire was always already dressed and Marcus was always running late? I walked to the window and watched the snow collect on Marcus's truck tracks in the driveway. Our house sat on Maple Street in a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone, where Mrs. Patterson next door could tell you what time the mail arrived and Mr. Chen across the street waved every morning from his garden. It was the kind of place where affairs were whispered about in grocery store aisles and divorce was still scandalous enough to make you the subject of casserole dish sympathy and barely concealed judgment. Marcus and I had bought this house 4 years ago with money we'd saved from both our jobs and a small inheritance from my grandmother. We'd painted every room together, arguing good-naturedly about whether the kitchen should be sage green or cream, settling on a warm yellow that made morning coffee feel like sunshine. I'd planted the garden myself, choosing flowers that would bloom in sequence from spring through fall. This house was supposed to be our forever home, the place where we'd raise children and grow old together. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was discovering my husband's betrayal in the bedroom where we'd planned our future. Surrounded by Christmas decorations I'd hung myself because Marcus always said he was too busy but would help later. Later never came. Just like so many of his promises, I opened his wallet again and found something I'd missed the first time, tucked behind his driver's license. A small slip of paper with handwriting I recognized immediately. Claire's neat, rounded script that our mother had always praised. The same handwriting that used to address my birthday cards and thank you notes. Can't wait for Kay to be at her school thing tonight. Meet me at 7. Wear the cologne I like. My school thing. Last Tuesday's parent-teacher conferences, the quarterly meetings I'd been organizing for 3 months, staying late to discuss every child's progress with their family. I'd come home exhausted at 9:30, found Marcus watching television and Claire reading a book in the living room, both of them looking relaxed and normal. Claire had even asked how the conferences went, her voice full of sisterly concern. I sat down hard on the bed, the receipt and note still in my hands, and tried to remember if there had been other signs I'd dismissed, the way Marcus had started showering before bed instead of in the morning. How Claire always seemed to know what he wanted for dinner before I did. The morning I'd found 2 coffee cups in the sink, when I was sure I'd only made one. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Jessica, asking if I wanted to grab lunch tomorrow. Jessica worked at the high school as a guidance counselor, and she'd been my anchor since college. She was the one who'd talked me through every major decision, including whether to marry Marcus. She'd always said he was a good guy but worried he was too comfortable, too settled for someone who was only 25 when we got engaged. I almost texted her back immediately, almost let everything spill out in a stream of frantic messages, but something stopped me. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was the teacher in me that had learned to think before reacting when faced with crisis. Either way, I put the phone down and forced myself to think strategically. If I confronted them now separately or together, they'd have time to coordinate their stories, to make me look like the paranoid wife who couldn't trust her husband and sister. They'd already proven they were good at lying to my face. Marcus would probably say the lingerie was for me, that he'd gotten Claire's size by accident, and Claire would back him up with wide, innocent eyes. I'd end up apologizing for snooping, for not trusting them, for being the kind of woman who goes through her husband's wallet. No, if they wanted to play games, I needed to understand the rules first. I put everything back exactly where I'd found it, and went downstairs to start dinner, the same routine I'd been following for 8 years. Brown the ground beef, add the onions and garlic, season the sauce, boil the pasta. Comfort food for a life that was no longer comfortable, domestic rituals that now felt like performing a play for an audience that wasn't paying attention. When Marcus came home, he kissed my cheek and asked what smelled so good, and I told him spaghetti and meatballs like it was any other Tuesday. He seemed tired, distracted, checking his phone more than usual. Claire emerged from her room wearing a new sweater I'd never seen before, something fitted and flattering that probably came from the same shopping trip as the red lingerie. We ate dinner like a normal family, talking about Christmas plans, and whether we should drive to Mom and Dad's on Christmas Eve, or Christmas morning. Claire suggested Christmas morning, saying she wasn't feeling well and might need to rest on Christmas Eve. Marcus agreed immediately, which struck me as odd because he usually preferred the evening visits so we could sleep in on Christmas Day, but now I understood why he wanted the house to ourselves on Christmas Eve. After dinner, I washed dishes while they watched a Christmas movie in the living room. I could hear Claire laughing at something Marcus said, the sound bright and flirty in a way that made my stomach clench. When I finished cleaning, I announced I was going to take a long bath and read, my usual Tuesday night routine. They both said goodnight without looking away from the television. In the bathroom with the door locked and the water running, I finally let myself feel the full weight of what I'd discovered, not just the affair, but the planning behind it. The casual way they'd been living this double life under my roof, using my routines and schedules to facilitate their betrayal. The guest room I'd prepared for my sister, making sure she had fresh towels and extra blankets, had become their secret space. I sank into the hot water and closed my eyes, trying to remember the last time I'd felt truly happy, really, genuinely happy, not just content or going through the motions. It had been months, maybe longer. I'd been so focused on being a good wife, a good sister, a good teacher, that I'd forgotten to pay attention to whether any of it was making me feel alive. When I finally got out of the bath, the house was quiet, except for the low murmur of the television downstairs. I put on my pajamas and climbed into bed with a book, but the words swam on the page. Every sound made me wonder what they were doing, whether they were sitting closer together on the couch, whether Marcus was touching her in ways he'd stopped touching me. Around 11, I heard Marcus's footsteps on the stairs, The familiar creak of the third step from the top. He brushed his teeth, changed into his sleep clothes, and slid into bed beside me like he had thousands of times before. But when he said goodnight and rolled over to his side of the bed, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I noticed he smelled different, not like another woman's perfume, but like guilt, like secrets. I lay awake long after his breathing deepened into sleep, staring at the ceiling and listening to the house settle around us. Somewhere down the hall, Claire was probably lying awake too, maybe thinking about tomorrow night when I'd be late at school again, or maybe planning what excuse she'd use to be out of the house when Marcus got home from work. The snow kept falling outside our window, covering the garden I'd planted, the driveway where Marcus parked his truck, the mailbox with our last name painted in neat blue letters. By morning, everything would look clean and fresh, like a blank slate. But underneath the snow, everything would be exactly the same, just hidden. I must have dozed off sometime before dawn because I woke to the sound of Marcus's alarm at 6:30. He moved around the bedroom quietly, gathering his work clothes and heading for the shower. I kept my eyes closed and listened to the water run, then heard him pad downstairs for coffee and breakfast. The front door closed at 7:15, right on schedule, and his truck rumbled to life in the driveway. 20 minutes later, I heard Claire's door open, and her footsteps moving toward the kitchen. I stayed in bed until I heard the shower running again, then got up and dressed for work. When I came downstairs, Claire was sitting at the kitchen table with coffee and toast, scrolling through her phone. "Good morning," she said without looking up, and I wondered if she could hear the strain in her own voice, or if guilt had made her deaf to her own "Morning," I replied, pouring coffee and buttering bread like this was just another Wednesday, like I hadn't spent the night planning how to destroy both their lives. "Sleep well?" "Fine," she said, still not meeting my eyes. "You like a baby," I lied, and took my coffee upstairs to finish getting ready for work. At school, I moved through my classes on autopilot, teaching multiplication tables and reading comprehension while my mind worked through possibility. My third graders were excited about Christmas break starting in just 10 days, and their energy was infectious enough that I almost forgot about the receipt in Marcus's wallet. Almost. During lunch, I sat in my empty classroom and forced myself to think practically. If I was going to confront them, I needed evidence beyond a receipt and a note. If I was going to leave Marcus, I needed to understand our finances and legal situation. If I was going to survive this, I needed a plan that didn't depend on anyone else rescuing. I opened my laptop and started researching divorce laws in our state, community property rights, and what constituted evidence of adultery. The legal websites were dry and technical, but they painted a clear picture. I could file for divorce on grounds of adultery if I had proof, which would affect how property and assets were divided. The house would be a sticking point, since both our names were on the mortgage, but the inheritance money from my grandmother that had provided our down payment might be considered separate property. The more I read, the more I realized how financially vulnerable I'd made myself. We had joint checking and savings accounts, but Marcus handled most of our finances because he said he was better with numbers. I had no idea how much we owed on credit cards, what our investment accounts looked like, or even what our monthly expenses really were. I'd been content to let him manage everything as long as the bills got paid, and I had money for groceries and classroom supplies. That afternoon, I stopped at the bank on my way home and asked to speak with someone about our account. The teller, a young woman named Amy who'd helped us before, pulled up our information and started explaining our balances. What I learned made my stomach drop to my shoes. Our savings account, which I thought had about $15,000, had less than $3,000. Our checking account was overdrawn by $200. We had 4 credit cards I didn't know about, all with balances over their limit. According to Amy, Marcus had been the primary person making withdrawals and purchases for the past 6 months, and most of them were cash withdrawals or purchases at stores I didn't recognize. "Has he mentioned any large purchases or investments?" Amy asked gently, probably reading the shock on my face. "No," I managed. "He hasn't mentioned anything." I drove home in a daze, trying to process the double betrayal. Not only was Marcus cheating on me with my sister, but he'd been spending our money, depleting our savings, running up debt I didn't know existed. Whatever he'd been buying for Claire, or wherever they'd been going together. It had cost us nearly everything we'd worked for. When I pulled into the driveway, Marcus's truck was already there, even though he usually didn't get home until 6. I sat in my car for a moment, gathering courage, then walked into the house like I always did, calling out hello as I hung up my coat. Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway, and for the first time in months, he seemed genuinely happy to see me. "Hey babe," he said, crossing to kiss my cheek. "How was your day?" "Fine," I said, studying his face for signs of deception. "You're home early. Shop was slow, so Jim sent me home." He was smiling, relaxed, like a man without a care in the world. "Claire's working late tonight, so I thought maybe we could order pizza, watch a movie, like old times. Like old times, before my sister moved in, before the late nights and early mornings and mysterious errands, before red lingerie receipts and empty savings accounts." "That sounds nice," I said, and meant it. Part of me wanted to believe this was Marcus trying to reconnect, to repair whatever had gone wrong between us. The other part of me, the part that had seen the bank statements, knew this was probably guilt or manipulation or both. We ordered pizza from Tony's, the place we'd gone on our first date, and settled on the couch to watch It's a Wonderful Life, a Christmas tradition we'd started in our second year of marriage. Marcus put his arm around me, and for a moment, I almost forgot about the lies and the money, and the way my sister couldn't meet my eyes anymore. But during the movie, Marcus's phone buzzed 3 times with text messages. Each time, he glanced at the screen, and then put the phone face down on the coffee table without responding. By the third buzz, he seemed agitated, distracted from the movie he'd suggested we watch together. "You can answer it," I said casually. "I don't mind. It's just work stuff," he said, but his voice was tight. "Nothing important." After the movie ended, we went to bed early, and Marcus was more affectionate than he'd been in weeks. He held me close, told me he loved me, said he was sorry if he'd been distant lately. It felt like forgiveness or closure, like the last good night we'd ever have as a married couple. I fell asleep in his arms, and for a few hours I almost believed we could fix this. I woke up at 2 in the morning to find his side of the bed empty. The bathroom light wasn't on, and I could hear voices downstairs, low and urgent. I slipped out of bed and crept to the top of the stairs, staying in the shadows where I could listen without being seen. "She almost caught me looking at my phone," Marcus was saying. "This is getting too risky. We just have to be careful until after Christmas," Claire replied. "Then we can tell her together. It'll be easier if we present a united front." I hate lying to her face every day. She made dinner, and I sat there eating it, knowing what we're planning to do. "You think I like this?" Claire's voice was sharp. "She's my sister. But we can't keep living like this, and you know she'll never understand. She'll fight the divorce, try to take everything, make it ugly. Maybe we should just tell her now, get it over with." "No," Claire was firm. "After Christmas, we stick to the plan. I'll find an apartment, you'll file the papers, and by New Year's, this will all be behind us." I stayed frozen at the top of the stairs, listening to them plan the end of my marriage, like it was a business transaction. They weren't just having an affair, they were strategizing my humiliation, timing it for maximum emotional impact. They were going to let me cook Christmas dinner, wrap presents, play happy family, and then destroy my life while I was still picking tinsel out of the carpet. The plan was simple and cruel: wait until after Christmas, so I couldn't ruin their holiday, then present me with divorce papers, and Claire's moving out as a fait accompli. They probably assumed I'd be so shocked and grateful for their honesty that I wouldn't fight them on the financial settlement. Maybe they even thought I'd thank them for waiting until after Christmas to destroy my world. I crept back to bed and lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling and feeling something cold and hard settle in my chest. Not anger, exactly, but clarity. They had a plan, but they didn't know I knew about it. They were counting on my politeness, my desire to avoid conflict, my tendency to put everyone else's feelings before my own. They were counting on me being the same Karen who had been making excuses for them for months, who had been cooking their meals and washing their laundry while they planned my destruction. They were wrong. The next morning, I woke before Marcus's alarm and lay quietly beside him, watching him sleep. His face was peaceful, younger looking without the guilty tension he'd been carrying lately. I wondered if he felt relief, knowing the charade was almost over, or if he felt anything at all. When his alarm went off, I pretended to wake up slowly, stretching and yawning like I'd slept soundly. "Good morning," I said, smiling like a wife who had no idea her husband was counting down the days until he could file divorce papers. "Morning, babe," he said, kissing my forehead before getting up to shower. "Sleep well?" "Like the dead," I said, and watched him flinch slightly at my choice of words. After he left for work, I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, pretending to work on lesson plans, while Claire got ready in the next room. When she came downstairs, she seemed more nervous than usual, fumbling with her car keys and avoiding eye contact. "I might be late tonight," she said, pouring coffee into a travel mug. "End of month stuff at work." "No problem," I said cheerfully. "Marcus and I will probably just have leftovers and watch TV. Quiet night." She nodded quickly and headed for the door, pausing only to call back, "Have a good day at school." "I will," I called after her, and I meant it, because today was the day I started fighting back. As soon as her car pulled out of the driveway, I opened my laptop and began researching in earnest. Not just divorce law this time, but private investigators, asset protection, and how to document evidence of adultery. I learned about phone records and credit card statements, about hiring professionals to gather evidence that would hold up in court. I also learned something else. In our state, if I could prove adultery, I might be entitled to a larger share of marital assets, and any debt Marcus had incurred without my knowledge could be considered his separate responsibility. The money he'd been spending on Claire, the credit cards I didn't know about, the depleted savings account, if I could prove it was all connected to the affair, I might not be left with nothing after all. By the time I had to leave for school, I had a list of 3 private investigators and 2 divorce attorneys, all with excellent reviews and reputations for handling complicated cases. I also had a plan that was starting to form, one that would ensure Marcus and Claire's Christmas morning was every bit as devastating as the one they'd planned for me. But first, I needed proof, real proof, not just receipts and overheard conversation. I needed evidence that would be undeniable, that would prevent them from twisting the narrative, or painting me as the bitter, paranoid wife who couldn't handle her husband's innocent friendship with her sister. At school, I called the first private investigator on my list during my planning period. Linda Chen had been recommended by 3 different legal websites, and her voice was calm and professional when I explained my situation. "How long do you think this has been going on?" she asked. "Months, maybe longer. I found evidence yesterday, but looking back, I think I've been missing signs for a while, and they're living in your house. My sister is staying in our guest room. She moved in August." Linda was quiet for a moment. "That's actually helpful from an evidence standpoint. Home surveillance is easier to justify legally. How much time do we have before they suspect you know? They're planning to tell me after Christmas, so about 2 weeks. That's plenty of time to gather what we need. Can you meet tomorrow afternoon to go over the detail?" I scheduled the appointment for Friday after school, then called the divorce attorney who'd been recommended most frequently. Patricia Williams had been practicing family law for 20 years, and had a reputation for protecting women's interests in high-conflict divorces. "I'd like to schedule a consultation," I told her secretary. "I need to discuss a potential divorce involving adultery and financial impropriety. Mrs. Williams has an opening Monday morning at 10. Will that work?" "Perfect." When I hung up, I felt like I was finally taking action instead of just reacting. For months, maybe years, I'd been letting other people make decisions about my life. Marcus managing our finances, Claire moving into our house, both of them planning my future without consulting me. Now I was going to make some plans of my own. The rest of the school day passed in a blur of Christmas crafts and multiplication worksheets. My students were getting more excited and less focused as winter break approached, but their energy felt contagious rather than exhausting. Maybe it was because I finally had something to look forward to myself. When I got home, Marcus was already there again, sitting at the kitchen table with a beer and a troubled expression. He looked up when I walked in, and for a moment, I thought he might confess everything. Instead, he just said, "We need to talk about money." My heart rate spiked, but I kept my voice calm. "What about money? I've been going over our accounts, and we're in a tighter spot than I thought. The credit cards are higher than I'd like, and I think we should probably scale back Christmas this year. Maybe just do gifts for the kids and the family, skip the big family dinner." It was masterful, really. He was preparing me for financial hardship, while simultaneously positioning himself as the responsible one who'd discovered the problem and was trying to fix it. In reality, he was probably trying to hide how much money he'd spent on Claire, maybe even planning to claim they couldn't afford a divorce attorney if I fought the settlement. How tight are we talking? I asked, sitting down across from him. Pretty tight. I think I might have been too optimistic about some investments, and the shop's been slower than usual. We're not in crisis mode, but we need to be careful. Investments.
That was new. What kind of investments?
Marcus shifted in his chair, suddenly looking uncomfortable. Just some opportunities that came up. Nothing risky, but the returns haven't been what I expected. More lies, delivered with the same earnest expression he'd worn when he told me the lingerie receipt was for me and he'd just gotten confused about the size. I nodded sympathetically and asked a few questions about which bills needed to be prioritized, playing the role of the concerned wife who trusted her husband to manage their finances. Inside, I was calculating if Marcus had been spending money on Claire for months, claiming it was investments, then the private investigator would be able to trace those expenses, credit card records, ATM withdrawals, restaurant receipts. It would all create a paper trail that would prove the affair and show how much marital money had been spent on it. Should I cancel the Christmas party? I asked. We'd been planning to host Marcus's family on Christmas Eve, a tradition we'd started 3 years ago. If money's tight, maybe we should just do something simple. No, Marcus said quickly. We can still do the party. I just think we should be careful about gifts and maybe not go overboard on decorations. Of course he didn't want to cancel the Christmas Eve party. That was probably when they'd planned to tell everyone about their relationship, maybe even announcing it as their Christmas gift to the family. The thought of their faces when I revealed what I knew instead was almost enough to make me smile. Claire came home around 8, claiming she'd worked late but looking like she'd been shopping. She had that slightly flushed, excited look of someone who'd spent money on something special, and she was carrying a small bag from a jewelry store downtown. How was work? I asked brightly. Busy, she said, clutching the bag protectively. End of year stuff, you know how it is. Marcus and Claire exchanged a quick glance, and I saw something pass between them. An acknowledgement, maybe, or a reminder about their timeline. 2 weeks until Christmas. 2 weeks until they planned to destroy my life and start their new one together. I'm exhausted, Claire announced. I think I'll just grab a shower and go to bed early. I'll probably turn in early too, Marcus agreed. Long day tomorrow. They were getting rid of me, I realized, sending me upstairs so they could have the living room to themselves, maybe exchange gifts or make more plans. The jewelry store bag was probably for Marcus, something she'd bought with money she'd borrowed from him, money that had come from our joint accounts. Good idea, I said, standing up and stretching. I have papers to grade anyway. I went upstairs and ran water for a bath, making enough noise to suggest I'd be occupied for a while. Then I crept to the top of the stairs and listened. Sure enough, within 10 minutes, I could hear them talking quietly in the living room. I couldn't make out words, but the tone was intimate, conspiratorial. I went back to the bathroom and actually took the bath, using the time to think through what I'd learned from Linda Chen about documenting evidence. Starting tomorrow, I needed to pay attention to their schedules, their moods, any changes in routine that might indicate when they were meeting or communicating. I also needed to start protecting myself financially, opening a separate bank account, gathering copies of important documents, making sure I had access to my own credit report and financial records. If Marcus thought he could control the divorce by controlling our money, he was in for a surprise. When I finally went to bed, Marcus was already asleep or pretending to be. I lay beside him in the dark, listening to his breathing, and thinking about how many nights I'd fallen asleep next to him without realizing he was planning to leave me. How many mornings I'd kissed him goodbye while he was on his way to meet my sister. The snow had stopped falling, and moonlight streamed through our bedroom window, casting everything in silver and shadow. In 2 weeks, this would all be over. Marcus and Claire thought they were counting down to their freedom, but they were actually counting down to their reckoning. I closed my eyes and slept better than I had in months. Friday afternoon couldn't come fast enough. I sat through faculty meetings and parent conferences, nodding at the right moments, while my mind raced through everything I needed to discuss with Linda Chen. My students seemed to sense my distraction, and more than one asked if I was feeling okay. I managed to reassure them with smiles and promises that I was just thinking about Christmas vacation. The private investigator's office was located in a converted Victorian house downtown, the kind of place that probably used to be someone's family home before becoming office space for lawyers and accountants. Linda Chen met me in a small conference room lined with law books and certificates, her handshake firm and her eyes kind but businesslike. "Before we start," she said, pulling out a legal pad and a digital recorder, "I want you to understand that what we're about to discuss is confidential, but I'll be taking notes and possibly recording conversations for evidence purposes. Are you comfortable with that?" I nodded, settling into the chair across from her desk. "I need to know the truth, whatever it takes." Linda smiled slightly. "Good, that's the attitude that gets results. Now tell me everything from the beginning. And don't leave out details that seem unimportant. Sometimes the smallest things end up being the most revealing." I started with the receipt, then backtracked to describe the changes I'd noticed in Marcus and Claire over the past few months. Linda asked specific questions about their schedules, their behavior around each other, any new expenses or habits I'd observed. When I mentioned the depleted savings account and unknown credit cards, she leaned forward with interest. "Financial infidelity often goes hand in hand with romantic infidelity," she explained. "If your husband has been spending marital assets on another woman, that strengthens your position significantly. Do you have access to bank statements and credit card records?" "Some of them. Marcus handles most of our finances, but I can probably get copies from the bank. We'll need those, and we'll also want to trace where the money went. Hotels, restaurants, gifts, travel. Anything that suggests he was supporting a relationship with your sister. The good news is that since they're both living in your house, we have several options for gathering evidence." Linda explained the various surveillance techniques she could use, from installing hidden cameras in common areas of the house, to tracking their movements when they left together. She could also monitor their communications if I could provide access to phone records or computer passwords. "The key is building a comprehensive picture." One receipt might be explained away, but dozens of restaurant meals, hotel visits, and gift purchases create a pattern that's much harder to deny. We discussed timing and logistics. Linda would start surveillance immediately, focusing on documenting their meetings and any evidence of intimate behavior. She'd also begin tracing the financial trail, working with a forensic accountant to identify exactly how much marital money had been spent on the affair. "How long before we have enough evidence to proceed?" I asked. "Given that they're living under your roof and apparently meeting regularly, I'd estimate we'll have what we need within a week. The financial analysis might take a bit longer, but we should have preliminary findings by early next week." The cost was significant but manageable, especially if it meant protecting my share of our assets in the divorce. Linda required a retainer up front, which I paid with a check from my personal account, the small checking account I'd maintained from before our marriage that Marcus had never had access to. As I was leaving, Linda handed me a small device that looked like a phone charger. "This is a recording device," she explained. "If you can plug it into an outlet in a common area where they spend time, it'll pick up conversations within about 15 feet. Just remember that in our state, recording in your own home is legal as long as you're not in spaces where there's an expectation of privacy, like bedrooms or bathrooms." Driving home, I felt a mixture of excitement and dread. Part of me was thrilled to finally be taking action, to stop being the victim, and start fighting back, but another part of me recognized that once I started down this path, there would be no going back. I was about to systematically document the destruction of my marriage, gathering evidence that would prove my husband and sister had betrayed me in the most intimate way possible. The house was empty when I arrived, which gave me the perfect opportunity to install Linda's recording device. I chose an outlet behind the couch in the living room, the spot where Marcus and Claire seemed to have most of their private conversations. The device looked exactly like a phone charger, innocent enough that even if they noticed it, they'd probably assume I'd just left my charger plugged in. Marcus came home around 6:30 carrying takeout bags from Chen's Garden, our favorite Chinese restaurant. "Thought we'd have a nice dinner," he said, kissing my cheek. Claire should be home soon. It struck me as odd that he'd ordered enough food for 3 people without asking if I had other plans, and that he seemed to know exactly when Claire would be home. More evidence of coordination between them, more proof that I was the outsider in my own household. Claire arrived 20 minutes later looking flushed and happy in a way that made my stomach twist. She'd done something different with her hair, and she was wearing makeup even though she'd supposedly been at work all day. When she saw the Chinese food containers spread across the kitchen counter, she smiled at Marcus with such obvious affection that I wondered how I'd missed it before. "This looks amazing," she said, and Marcus grinned back at her like they shared some private joke. We ate dinner together, making conversation about work and Christmas plans, but I could feel the undercurrent of tension and excitement between them. They were careful not to look at each other too directly, but their awareness of each other was palpable. When Claire reached for the soy sauce at the same time, Marcus did, their fingers brushed, and both of them pulled back like they'd been burned. After dinner I announced that I had papers to grade and excused myself to the spare bedroom I used as a home office. Really, I wanted to give them privacy so Linda's recording device could capture whatever they said when they thought I wasn't listening. I spread lesson plans across the desk and tried to focus on next week's math unit, but my mind kept wandering to what might be happening downstairs. Were they sitting closer together on the couch? Were they making plans for their Christmas confession? Were they talking about me, about how oblivious I'd been, about how easy it had been to fool me? Around 9 o'clock I heard Claire's footsteps on the stairs, followed by the sound of her bedroom door closing. Marcus came up about 10 minutes later, finding me still bent over my papers. "You've been working hard lately," he said, standing behind my chair and rubbing my shoulder. "Everything okay at school?" His hands felt good, familiar, and for a moment I wanted to lean into his touch and pretend everything was normal. Instead, I forced myself to stay focused on the papers in front of me. "Just trying to get everything organized before Christmas break," I said. "You know how crazy things get this time of year. You should take a break. Come watch TV with me." I looked up at him, studying his face for signs of deception or guilt. He looked tired but genuine, like a husband who missed spending time with his wife. Maybe he did miss me, in some compartmentalized way that allowed him to feel affection for me while planning to leave me for my sister. "In a few minutes," I said. "I just want to finish this lesson plan." He kissed the top of my head and left me alone, and I heard him moving around our bedroom, getting ready for bed. When I finally joined him 20 minutes later, he was reading a magazine and seemed genuinely pleased to see me. "Good day?" he asked as I changed into my pajamas. Yeah. Shop was busy, getting a lot of cars in for tune-ups before people drive to visit family for Christmas. It sounded plausible, but I found myself analyzing everything he said for potential lies. Was the shop really busy, or had he spent the day with Clay? Were those tune-ups real, or was he just creating alibis for time they'd spent together? We talked for a few more minutes about mundane things, whether we needed to buy more coffee, what time his parents were coming to Christmas dinner, whether the furnace was making a strange noise. Normal married couple conversation, the kind we'd been having for 8 years. It felt surreal to discuss coffee purchases with a man who was planning to divorce me in 2 weeks. When Marcus turned off the light and settled into his side of the bed, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and thinking about Linda's recording device downstairs. Tomorrow I'd be able to listen to whatever Marcus and Claire had talked about after I went upstairs. For the first time since finding that receipt, I'd have access to their unguarded thoughts and plans. Saturday morning brought the first real test of my acting abilities. Marcus suggested we all go Christmas shopping together, hitting the mall and then maybe grabbing lunch somewhere nice. It was exactly the kind of family outing we used to enjoy, back when Claire first moved in, and I thought having my sister around would bring us all closer together. "That sounds fun," I said, buttering toast and trying to sound enthusiastic. "Claire, are you free today?" Claire looked up from her coffee, glancing quickly at Marcus before answering. "I think so. I mean, yes, that would be nice." The mall was crowded with holiday shoppers, families with strollers and teenagers clustering around storefronts. We split up initially, agreeing to meet at the food court in 2 hours. I used the time to buy gifts for Marcus's parents and siblings, trying to focus on normal Christmas preparations, while part of my mind catalogued every interaction between Marcus and Claire. They were being careful, but not careful enough. I noticed the way Claire kept checking her phone, and how Marcus always seemed to know where she was in the crowd even when they were supposedly shopping separately. When we met for lunch, they arrived at the food court within minutes of each other, both carrying small shopping bags, and wearing similar expressions of barely contained excitement. Over pizza and sodas, Claire mentioned that she might be moving out after the holidays, maybe finding a place closer to her job. Marcus jumped in immediately, saying that made sense, and that she shouldn't feel obligated to stay just because we had the extra room. "It's been so nice having you here," I said, watching their faces carefully, "but I understand wanting your own space. Have you started looking at apartments?" Claire shifted uncomfortably, a little bit. "Just preliminary looking." "I could help you look," I offered. "I love apartment hunting. We could make a day of it, look at places and grab lunch somewhere nice." The panic that flashed across Claire's face was unmistakable. "Oh, that's okay. I don't want to impose. I can handle it myself." "It's no imposition," I pressed, enjoying the way Marcus was trying not to look directly at either of us. "Sisters should help each other out. Besides, I know the city better than you do. I could probably suggest neighborhoods you haven't considered." "We'll see," Claire said weakly, and quickly changed the subject to the Christmas decorations we'd seen in the store windows. That evening, after we'd all returned home and settled into our usual routines, I made an excuse about needing to run to the grocery store for milk and bread. Instead, I drove to a coffee shop across town and called Linda Chen from my car. "How's the surveillance going?" I asked. "Very well. I've already documented 3 meetings between your husband and sister at locations outside your home. Yesterday they had lunch at a restaurant downtown, and they were definitely behaving like a romantic couple. Hand-holding, intimate conversation, the works." My stomach clenched, but I kept my voice steady. "What about the financial investigation? That's where things get really interesting. I've traced about $12,000 in withdrawals and charges over the past 4 months that seem to be related to the affair: hotel rooms, restaurant meals, jewelry purchases, even what looks like a weekend trip to the coast last month. $12,000, nearly everything we'd had in savings, plus money that had apparently been charged to credit cards I didn't know existed. They'd been financing their relationship with my security, my future, money that had been earmarked for emergencies and house repairs and maybe someday a family." "There's something else," Linda continued. "I've been monitoring their communications, and it looks like your sister has been applying for apartments, but not just any apartments. She's been looking at places that cost significantly more than her current salary should be able to support." "Meaning what?" "Meaning your husband has probably promised to support her financially, either through alimony or by liquidating marital assets. They're not just planning to be together romantically, they're planning to maintain a certain lifestyle using money that's rightfully half yours." I sat in the coffee shop parking lot, gripping my phone and trying to process the scope of their betrayal. It wasn't just an affair, it was a comprehensive plan to steal my husband, my financial security, and my future. They'd been working together to position themselves for a divorce that would leave me with nothing while setting them up in a comfortable new life together. "What's our next step?" I asked. "We keep gathering evidence for another few days, then you'll meet with your attorney. By the time we're finished, you'll have enough documentation to ensure a very favorable settlement." They think they're being clever, but they've actually created a paper trail that proves everything we need to prove. When I got home, the house was quiet except for the sound of the television in the living room. I found Marcus watching a basketball game, but he seemed distracted, checking his phone every few minutes. "Where's Claire?" I asked, settling onto the couch beside him. "She went to bed early. Said she had a headache." I nodded and pretended to watch the game, but my mind was racing through everything Linda had told me. $12,000, weekend trips to the coast, apartment applications for places Claire couldn't afford on her own. The depth of their planning was staggering, and the fact that they'd been conducting their relationship so openly while living under my roof felt like a special kind of cruelty. "Marcus," I said during a commercial break, "can I ask you something?" He looked at me with what seemed like genuine attention. "Of course. Are we okay? I mean, are you happy with us, with our marriage?" The question seemed to catch him off guard, He muted the television and turned to face me more fully, his expression serious. "Why are you asking me?" "I don't know. I guess I've been feeling like we're not as close as we used to be, like maybe we're both just going through the motions." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him struggling with how to respond. Part of him probably wanted to confess everything, to end the charade, and start the divorce process immediately, but another part of him, the part that was still committed to their timeline, wasn't ready to give up the pretense. "Marriage goes through phases," he said finally. "We've been together for a long time, and sometimes things get routine, but that doesn't mean we're not solid. Do you still love me?" The question hung in the air between us, heavier than I'd intended. Marcus reached for my hand, and his touch was warm and familiar, even if it was also a lot. "Of course I love you," he said. "You're my wife," but there was something hollow in his voice, something that suggested he was reciting words rather than expressing feelings. Maybe he did love me, in some abstract way that coexisted with his love for my sister. Or maybe he was just saying what he thought I needed to hear until their timeline allowed for honesty. "I love you too," I said, and squeezed his hand. "I want us to work on being closer. Maybe after the holidays, we could plan some time together, just the two of." Marcus nodded, but his smile looked strained. "That sounds nice." We watched the rest of the game in companionable silence, his arm around my shoulders and my head resting against his chest. It felt like a goodbye, though he didn't know that yet. In a week or two, when Linda finished gathering evidence, and Patricia Williams filed the divorce papers, this would be one of the last peaceful moments we'd ever share. Sunday morning, I woke early, and decided to retrieve the recording device while Marcus and Claire were still asleep. The house was quiet, morning light streaming through the kitchen windows as I unplugged the device and replaced it with my actual phone charger. Back in my bedroom, I connected the device to my laptop and put on headphones to listen to what it had captured. Most of it was mundane: television shows, normal conversation during dinner, the sounds of people moving around the house. But there were also two recordings that made my blood run cold. The first was from Friday night, after I'd gone upstairs to work on lesson plan. Marcus and Claire had waited about 15 minutes before starting what was clearly a very intimate conversation. "I can't wait much longer," Claire was saying. "It's killing me, pretending like nothing's happening when all I want to do is touch you." "Just a few more weeks," Marcus replied. "We stick to the plan, and then we're free." Sometimes I think she knows something, the way she looks at me sometimes, like she's studying my face. She doesn't know anything. She's too trusting, too focused on being the perfect wife to see what's right in front of. The casual cruelty of that assessment took my breath away. Too trusting, too focused on being the perfect wife. Like my devotion to our marriage was a character flaw rather than the foundation of everything I'd built with him. The second recording was from Saturday morning, before we'd left for the mall. I'd been in the shower, and apparently Marcus and Claire had used the time to coordinate their shopping story. "We need to be more careful today," Marcus was saying. "She suggested helping you apartment hunt, and you looked like you'd seen a ghost." I panicked. What if she insists on coming with me to look at places? What if she wants to help me fill out applications? Just keep deflecting. Tell her you want to handle it yourself, that you need to figure out what you can afford on your own. "The place we looked at yesterday is perfect, but it's $1,500 a month. There's no way I can afford that without help." "Don't worry about money. Once the divorce is final, I'll be able to support both of us comfortably. The house will sell for at least $400,000, and even if she gets half, that's enough to start fresh." $400,000. They'd already had the house appraised, already calculated how much money they'd have to work with once they forced me out of my own home. The place Claire was referring to, the apartment she'd looked at yesterday while claiming to be at work, cost more than my monthly salary as a teacher. They were planning a lifestyle that would be funded by the destruction of everything I'd worked for. I sat on my bedroom floor, laptop balanced on my knees, and listened to the recordings twice more. Each time, the scope of their betrayal became clearer. This wasn't a passionate affair that had gotten out of hand. It was a calculated plan to steal my life and use it to fund their new one. The worst part wasn't even the infidelity. It was the way they talked about me, like I was an obstacle to be managed rather than a person with feelings and right. They'd reduced me to a problem that needed to be solved, a complication in their love story that could be handled with the right timing and strategy. When Marcus knocked on the bedroom door an hour later, asking if I wanted to go to church with him, I managed to smile and say yes. We'd been attending services together since we were newlyweds, sitting in the same pew every Sunday and participating in the same community rituals that had once made me feel connected to something larger than myself. That morning, sitting next to my husband and listening to a sermon about forgiveness and redemption, I felt like a stranger in my own life. The woman who had sung hymns and prayed for guidance in this same sanctuary was gone, replaced by someone harder and more calculated, someone who could smile at her husband while planning his destruction, who could make small talk with her sister while documenting her betrayal. After church, we stopped for brunch at a diner we'd been going to for years, the kind of place where the waitresses knew our usual orders and asked about our families. Marcus ordered pancakes and bacon, Claire got eggs Benedict, and I chose French toast, just like we had dozens of times before. But everything felt different now, like we were actors playing roles in a play that was about to close. I've been thinking about New Year's resolutions, Claire said, cutting into her eggs. I want to make some big changes in my life, be more independent, more honest about what I want. Marcus nodded enthusiastically. That's great. It's important to be true to yourself. What about you, Karen? Claire asked, turning to me with what looked like genuine interest. Any resolutions for the new year? I considered my answer carefully, thinking about the evidence Linda was gathering and the attorney I'd be meeting with tomorrow morning. I want to stop letting people take advantage of me, I said finally. I've spent too many years putting other people's needs before my own, trusting people who don't deserve it. I want to be stronger, more willing to fight for what's mine. Claire and Marcus exchanged a quick glance, and I saw something that might have been worry flicker across both their faces. That sounds healthy, Marcus said carefully. Sometimes being too giving can be a problem. Exactly, I agreed, smiling at both of them. I'm learning that the hard way. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, with the kind of bitter wind that made everyone walk faster and pull their coats tighter. I called in a personal day at school, claiming a doctor's appointment, and drove downtown to meet Patricia Williams. The law firm occupied 2 floors of a historic building near the courthouse, with the kind of mahogany furniture and leather-bound books that suggested competence and tradition. Patricia Williams herself was a woman in her 50s, with silver hair and sharp eyes, the kind of attorney who probably intimidated opposing counsel just by walking into a room. Tell me about your situation, she said, settling behind her desk with a legal pad and a cup of coffee. I started with the receipt and worked my way through everything I'd discovered, including the financial irregularities and the recordings Linda had captured. Patricia took notes without interrupting, occasionally asking for clarification or additional details. How long have you been married? She asked. 8 years. Any children? No. Previous marriages for either of you? No. Patricia nodded, making more notes. And the house is titled in both your names? Yes. But most of the down payment came from an inheritance I received from my grandmother before we were married. That's important. In our state, inherited assets that can be traced back to their source may be considered separate property, even if they were used to purchase marital assets. Do you have documentation of the inheritance? I think so. Bank records. The probate paperwork. Good. We'll need all of that. Now, about the evidence your investigator is gathering. Adultery can affect property division and spousal support, especially when marital assets have been used to fund the affair. Patricia explained the divorce process in our state, from filing petitions to discovery to potential trial dates. She was optimistic about my chances of receiving a favorable settlement, particularly given the evidence of financial misconduct and adultery. The key is controlling the narrative, she said. Your husband and his attorney will try to paint this as an amicable divorce between 2 people who simply grew apart. We're going to tell a different story, one about betrayal, financial deception, and the systematic looting of marital assets to fund an extramarital relationship. How long will it take? That depends on whether they fight or try to settle quickly. If they cooperate, we could have everything resolved within 6 months. If they contest the terms, it could take a year or more. I left Patricia's office feeling more confident than I had in weeks. For the first time since finding that receipt, I had professionals on my side, people whose job it was to protect my interests and fight for what I deserved. Marcus and Claire thought they were going to blindside me with divorce papers and a moving truck, but they were the ones who were going to be surprised. That afternoon, I stopped by Linda's office to review the latest surveillance report. She'd documented several more meetings between Marcus and Claire, including what appeared to be apartment hunting, and a visit to a jewelry store where Marcus had purchased what looked like an engagement ring. "They're moving faster than they originally planned," Linda observed, spreading photographs across her desk. "Your husband seems eager to make this official." The photographs were devastating. Marcus and Claire holding hands in a restaurant. Marcus's hand on Claire's back as they walked into an apartment building, the two of them kissing in his truck outside a jewelry store. Each image was a nail in the coffin of my marriage, but also ammunition for the divorce proceeding. "There's something else," Linda said, pulling out a thick folder. The forensic accountant finished her preliminary analysis. "The total amount of marital funds spent on the affair is closer to $18,000, not 12. Your husband has been very creative with credit cards and cash advances. $18,000, more than I made in 4 months of teaching. Money that should have been used for house repairs, vacations together, maybe saving for the family we'd talked about having someday. Instead, it had funded hotel rooms, where my husband slept with my sister, restaurant meals where they planned my destruction, and an engagement ring for a woman who had never contributed a penny to our household expenses." "How much more time do you need?" I asked. "We could move forward now if we had to, but I'd like another few days to document their Christmas plans. If they're planning to announce their relationship at a family gathering, getting that on record could be very powerful in court." I thought about Marcus's suggestion that we host Christmas Eve dinner for his family, and Claire's eagerness to spend Christmas morning at our parents' house. Maybe they were planning a double announcement: Christmas Eve with his family, Christmas morning with mine. Two carefully orchestrated events where they'd present their relationship as a love story rather than a betrayal. "They're planning something for Christmas," I said. "I can feel it." Linda nodded. "Then we'll be ready for them. By the time they make their announcement, we'll have enough evidence to ensure they regret ever trying to deceive you." Driving home that evening, I felt like I was carrying a secret weapon. Marcus and Claire were still operating under the assumption that I was clueless, that they could control the timing and circumstances of their revelation. They had no idea that I'd spent the day with professionals who were documenting their every move and preparing for legal warfare. The house was warm and bright when I walked in, decorated with the Christmas lights I'd hung myself while Marcus claimed to be too busy to help. Claire was cooking dinner, something that smelled like rosemary and garlic, and Marcus was setting the table with our good china. "Perfect timing," Marcus said, kissing my cheek. Claire made lamb chops. "How was your doctor's appointment?" Claire asked, not looking up from the stove. "Fine," I said. "Just routine stuff." We ate dinner by candlelight, talking about Christmas preparations and work schedule. Marcus mentioned that he'd probably have to work late a few nights this week, finishing up projects before the holiday. Claire said she might be working some extra shifts to earn money for Christmas gifts. More lies, delivered with the same casual ease they'd been practicing for months. But now I knew where Marcus would really be when he claimed to be working late, and what Claire was really doing during those extra shifts. Every lie they told me was evidence. Every deception, another piece of ammunition for the divorce proceeding. After dinner, I helped Claire wash dishes while Marcus went to his workshop in the garage, supposedly to finish some Christmas projects. Claire seemed nervous, dropping a wine glass and cutting her finger on the broken pieces. "Let me see," I said, taking her hand and examining the cut. It wasn't deep, just a small nick that would heal in a few days. "I'm so clumsy lately," Claire said, allowing me to clean the cut and apply a bandage. "I think I'm just stressed about work. Is everything okay? You've seemed distracted lately." Claire pulled her hand away and busied herself with the remaining dishes. "Just the usual stuff. Money, career uncertainty, wondering what I'm doing with my life. You know you can talk to me about anything, right? I'm your sister. I want to help if I can." For a moment, Claire looked like she might actually confess everything. Her eyes filled with tears, and she opened her mouth as if to speak. Then she seemed to remember something, and the moment passed. "Thanks," she said quietly. "I appreciate that. I really do." That night, I lay in bed next to Marcus and thought about the cut on Claire's finger, the way she'd let me take care of her even while planning to destroy my life. There was something so intimate about that moment, so sisterly, that it almost made me reconsider what I was planning to do. But then I remembered the photographs Linda had shown me, the recordings I'd heard, the $18,000 they'd stolen from our savings. Claire might be my sister, but she'd made her choice. Now I was making mine. In the darkness, I listened to Marcus's breathing and planned my next move. Christmas was exactly 1 week away, and by the time it arrived, I'd be ready to give them both a gift they'd never forget. Tuesday morning brought an unexpected development that almost derailed everything I'd been carefully planning. I was in the kitchen making coffee when my phone rang, the display showing my mother's number. Mom rarely called before 9 in the morning, unless something was wrong, so I answered with a knot of worry already forming in my stomach. "Karen, honey, I have some news," Mom said, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she was trying to sound casual about something important. "Your father and I have decided to spend Christmas in Florida with Aunt Margaret. She's been having health problems, and we think this might be our last chance to see her." The coffee mug slipped from my hands, shattering on the kitchen floor in a spray of ceramic and hot liquid. "What do you mean, Florida? We've had Christmas plans for months." "I know, sweetheart, and I'm sorry for the short notice, but Margaret's doctor says she might not make it to Easter, and you know how close your father has always been to his sister. We booked flights last night." I stared at the mess on the floor, my mind racing through the implications. Marcus and Claire had been planning to announce their relationship at my parents' house on Christmas morning, using the family gathering as their stage. If my parents weren't going to be there, what would they do instead? "When are you leaving?" I asked, grabbing paper towels to clean up the coffee. "Thursday morning. I know it's terrible timing, but sometimes life doesn't give you choices. You and Marcus and Claire are welcome to join us. Of course, I could probably change our reservations." "No, don't do that. You should be with Aunt Margaret. We'll figure something out here." After Mom hung up, I sat at the kitchen table and tried to process this new wrinkle. Part of me felt relieved that my parents wouldn't be present for whatever Marcus and Claire had planned, but another part of me worried that this would accelerate their timeline. If they couldn't make their announcement at a big family gathering, they might decide to tell me privately, which would ruin my own plans for dramatic timing. I was still sitting there when Claire came downstairs, already dressed for work in a way that made me wonder if she really was going to the insurance office or meeting Marcus somewhere. "Everything okay?" she asked, noticing the paper towels and broken ceramic pieces I was still collecting. "Mom and Dad are going to Florida for Christmas. Aunt Margaret is sick." Claire's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, concern, and then something that looked almost like panic. "Florida? But we were supposed to go there Christmas morning." "I know. They're leaving Thursday." Claire poured herself coffee with hands that shook slightly, and I could practically see her mind working through the implication. Whatever she and Marcus had planned for Christmas morning would have to be revised, and revisions meant new opportunities for me to control the situation. "What are you thinking for Christmas now?" Claire asked, trying to sound casual. "I'm not sure yet. Maybe we'll just have a quiet day at home. Order Chinese food, watch movies, exchange gifts. Sometimes the simple Christmases are the best ones." The expression on Claire's face told me that a quiet Christmas at home was the last thing she wanted. She mumbled something about needing to think about it, and grabbed her purse, heading for the door with the kind of haste that suggested she needed to talk to Marcus immediately. After she left, I called Linda Chen to update her on the change in Christmas plan. "This could actually work in our favor," Linda said after I explained the situation. "If they were planning to announce their relationship at a family gathering, they'll have to come up with a new plan on short notice. People make mistakes when they're improvising." "What do you think they'll do instead?" "Hard to say, but my guess is they'll try to create a different kind of dramatic moment. Maybe they'll suggest going away for Christmas, just the three of you, and use that as an opportunity to tell. Or they might decide to move up their timeline and tell you before Christmas." The thought of spending Christmas in some romantic getaway, watching Marcus and Claire pretend to be siblings while planning to destroy my marriage, made my stomach turn. But it also presented an opportunity to document their behavior in a more controlled environment. Keep monitoring them, I told Linda. I have a feeling they're going to make some moves today. I was right. Around noon, Marcus called to say he was taking an extended lunch break and would be home for a while. He never came home during the day unless something significant was happening, so I made an excuse about needing to run errands and positioned myself at a coffee shop down the street where I could watch our house. Sure enough, Claire's car pulled into our driveway about 10 minutes after Marcus got home. She was supposed to be at work, but apparently the situation was urgent enough to warrant a fake sick day. They spent nearly 2 hours together before both leaving in separate cars, Marcus presumably returning to the shop and Claire supposedly going back to the insurance office. That evening, they both seemed unusually attentive and affectionate, like they were trying to create one last perfect family dinner before everything changed. Marcus complimented my cooking repeatedly, and Claire helped clear the table without being asked. They were being so nice that if I hadn't known what I knew, I might have thought we were finally becoming the close-knit family I'd always wanted. After dinner, Marcus suggested we all watch a Christmas movie together and we settled onto the couch with hot chocolate and cookies. It felt like a Norman Rockwell painting, except that 2 of the 3 people in the picture were planning to betray the third. Halfway through Miracle on 34th Street, Marcus's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and frowned, then excused himself to take the call in the kitchen. I could hear him talking in low, urgent tones, but couldn't make out the words. When he came back, he looked troubled. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Work stuff. One of the guys might have to work late tomorrow to finish a big project before Christmas. I might need to help him out." Another lie, delivered with the same practiced ease I'd been hearing for months. But this lie felt different, more immediate. Something was happening, some plan was being put into motion, and they thought I was too oblivious to note. Wednesday morning, I called in another personal day at school, and decided to conduct my own surveillance operation. I wanted to know what Marcus and Claire were really doing during their supposed work hours, especially since Linda's investigation had suggested they'd been meeting regularly during the day. I borrowed Jessica's car, since both Marcus and Claire would recognize mine, and positioned myself outside Marcus's shop around 9 in the morning. He arrived right on schedule, but instead of going inside, he stood in the parking lot checking his phone repeatedly. 20 minutes later, Claire's car pulled up, and Marcus got in on the passenger side. They drove across town to a part of the city I rarely visited, an area of newer developments and upscale shopping centers. I followed at a distance, trying to stay inconspicuous while keeping their car in sight. They pulled into the parking lot of a furniture store, and I watched from across the street as they went inside together. Furniture shopping. They were picking out furniture for the apartment Claire had been looking at, the $1,500 a month place she couldn't afford on her insurance company salary. They were furnishing their future together while I sat at home wondering why our savings account was empty. I waited in the parking lot for nearly 2 hours, watching them load a mattress and box spring into Marcus's truck. A mattress. They'd bought a bed together, something so intimate and domestic that it made the affair feel even more real than all the surveillance photos Linda had shown me. When they finished loading the furniture, they drove to a residential complex about 10 minutes away. I followed them to a cluster of modern apartment buildings, the kind of place where young professionals lived and paid premium rent for granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. Marcus and Claire unloaded the mattress together, carrying it up to a second-floor apartment. Like they'd done this before, they knew exactly where they were going, which meant this wasn't the first time they'd been here together. Claire had already rented the apartment, probably signed a lease and paid deposits with money that came from our joint accounts. I sat in Jessica's car watching the windows of what was apparently my sister's new apartment, and felt something cold and final settle in my chest. This wasn't just an affair anymore, it was a relocation. They weren't just planning to tell me about their relationship, they were planning to move in together immediately. Claire had probably given notice at our house, and Marcus had probably already consulted with a divorce attorney about the fastest way to liquidate our assets. Around 1 o'clock, they came back downstairs and drove to a restaurant I'd never been to, a trendy place with outdoor seating and expensive-looking menu boards. I parked where I could see them through the windows and watched them share lunch like any other couple celebrating a milestone. Marcus reached across the table to hold Claire's hand, and she laughed at something he said with genuine happiness. It struck me that I'd never seen Claire look that happy when she was living with us. All those months of claiming to be stressed about work and uncertain about her future, when really she'd been planning the most significant relationship of her life. She'd been miserable in our guest room because she'd been in love with my husband, and too guilty or afraid to do anything about it. When they finished lunch, they drove back toward our neighborhood, but instead of going home, they stopped at the bank. I watched Marcus go inside while Claire waited in the car, and when he came out 20 minutes later, he was carrying a manila envelope that probably contained withdrawal slips or account statements. They were liquidating assets, moving money, preparing for a divorce that I wasn't supposed to know was coming. Every day I spent teaching third graders about Christmas traditions and holiday math problems. Marcus was dismantling our financial life and building a new one with my sister. I followed them back to Marcus's shop, where they said goodbye with a kiss that lasted long enough to make me feel sick. Then Claire drove home, probably to maintain the pretense that she'd been at work all day, while Marcus presumably went back to his actual job. I sat in the shop parking lot for a few more minutes, watching Marcus through the office windows as he talked on the phone and shuffled through paperwork. He looked completely normal, like a man conducting ordinary business on an ordinary Wednesday. There was no sign of guilt or conflict, no indication that he'd just spent the morning furnishing an apartment where he planned to live with his wife's sister. That evening, both Marcus and Claire were home for dinner at the usual time, and both of them asked about my day with the kind of casual interest that suggested they had no idea I'd been watching them all afternoon. Marcus mentioned that work had been busy, and Claire complained about a difficult customer at the insurance office. More lies, told with such conviction that I almost admired their acting abilities. After dinner, Marcus announced that he needed to run out for a few hours to help his coworker with that big project he'd mentioned the night before. Claire said she was tired and would probably go to bed early. Within an hour of the dinner dishes being cleared, I was alone in the house, supposedly oblivious to the fact that my husband and sister were probably back at that apartment, setting up their new bed and planning their new life. I used the time alone to call Linda and update her on what I'd observed. "A mattress and apartment visits," Linda repeated. "That's even better than I hoped for. They're not just having an affair, they're actively preparing to cohabitate. This strengthens your position significantly." "How so?" "In divorce proceedings, judges take a dim view of spouses who use marital assets to set up households with their affair partners. The furniture purchases, apartment rental, all of it can be traced back to your joint accounts. Your husband isn't just cheating, he's stealing from you to finance his new relationship." Linda explained that the evidence we'd gathered was now strong enough to proceed with divorce filings, but she recommended waiting until after Christmas to see if Marcus and Claire would do anything else to incriminate themselves. "Let them think they're in control for a few more days," she advised. "The more confident they get, the more mistakes they'll make." Thursday morning brought a new complication when my parents called to say goodbye before leaving for the airport. Mom was crying, worried about leaving us alone for Christmas, and Dad was gruff with emotion about seeing his sister for what might be the last time. "Are you sure you don't want to fly down and meet us?" Mom asked. "It's not too late to change our reservations. We'll be fine, Mom. Take care of Aunt Margaret, and don't worry about us." After they hung up, I sat at the kitchen table and realized that for the first time in my adult life, I'd be spending Christmas without my parents. The holiday that was supposed to bring families together was instead scattering mine to different time zones and different loyalties. Marcus came downstairs already dressed for work, moving with the kind of energy that suggested he had plans beyond oil changes and brake repair. "Your parents get off okay?" he asked, pouring coffee into a travel mug. "They're probably boarding their flight right now. It's too bad they won't be here for Christmas, but I guess that means we can do whatever we want this year. Maybe we should plan something special, just the three of us." There it was, the opening they'd been waiting for. With my parents out of the picture, Marcus and Claire could control the entire Christmas narrative. They probably had something elaborate planned, some carefully orchestrated event that would make their announcement feel romantic rather than devastating. "What did you have in mind?" I asked. "I don't know yet. Maybe we could drive up to the mountains, rent a cabin for a few days, get away from everything, enjoy the snow, have a real Christmas getaway. A cabin in the mountains, isolated, romantic, the perfect place to deliver life-changing news to someone who had no escape route and no immediate support system. They were planning to trap me somewhere remote, tell me about their relationship, and probably expect me to drive home alone while they stayed to celebrate their first Christmas as a couple. That sounds lovely, I said, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. Claire would probably love that. I'll talk to her about it when she gets home from work. Marcus kissed my forehead and left for the shop, and I spent the morning making phone calls to ensure I'd be ready for whatever they planned. I called Patricia Williams to update her on the developments and schedule an emergency meeting for the day after Christmas. I called Linda to arrange for accelerated surveillance during any mountain cabin trip, and I called Jessica to let her know I might need somewhere to stay over the holiday. "What's going on?" Jessica asked, hearing something in my voice that I'd been trying to hide from everyone else. "I can't explain everything right now, but Marcus and I are probably getting divorced, and it's going to happen soon." Jessica was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "Are you okay? Do you need me to come over?" "I'm okay. I'm actually more than okay. I'm finally seeing things clearly, and I'm taking care of myself for once." "Good. It's about time. You've been too good to that man for too long." The comments surprised me. "What do you mean?" "Karen, you've been making excuses for Marcus for years. The way he never helps with household stuff, the way he manages all your money without consulting you, the way he dismisses your opinions about anything important. I've been waiting for you to wake up and realize you deserve better." I'd never realized that Jessica had been observing problems in my marriage that I'd been too close to see. Maybe everyone had been waiting for me to wake up, watching me diminish myself to accommodate a husband who was planning to leave me anyway. That afternoon, Claire came home from work, carrying shopping bags, and wearing an expression of barely contained excitement. She'd clearly been shopping for Christmas gifts, probably for Marcus, probably with money from our joint account. "I have some ideas about Christmas," she announced, settling at the kitchen table with the kind of energy that suggested she'd been rehearsing this conversation. "Marcus mentioned maybe going to the mountains. He said something about a cabin. It sounds romantic." Claire's cheeks flushed pink. "I think it would be nice to get away from everything. Just relax and enjoy each other's company. I found this place online that looks perfect. 3 bedrooms, hot tub, fireplace, completely secluded. 3 bedrooms. They were maintaining the pretense that we'd all sleep separately, even while planning to use the trip as their announcement opportunity. The mental image of sharing a romantic mountain cabin with my husband and his lover made me feel sick, but it also presented the perfect opportunity to control the narrative of their revelation. "When would we go?" I asked. "Christmas Eve morning. We could stay through the weekend, come back Sunday night. 4 days in a mountain cabin with 2 people who were planning to destroy my life. 4 days of watching them try to hide their relationship while building up to their grand confession. 4 days of pretending I didn't know what was coming while documenting every moment of their deception." "That sounds perfect," I said, smiling like a woman who had no idea she was being led to her own execution. "I'll start packing tonight." Claire beamed at me with what looked like genuine affection, and for a moment I wondered if she felt any guilt about what they were planning to do. She was still my sister, still the girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms and help me braid friendship bracelets for our classmates. Somewhere underneath the deception and betrayal, there had to be some part of her that recognized the cruelty of what they were doing. But then I remembered the apartment, the mattress, the $18,000 they'd stolen from our savings, and I reminded myself that Claire had made her choice. She'd chosen Marcus over me, chosen love over loyalty, chosen her own happiness over her sister's well-being. Whatever guilt she might feel wasn't enough to stop her from participating in my humiliation. That evening, Marcus came home with brochures and reservation confirmations, proof that he'd been planning this mountain getaway for days or maybe weeks. The cabin looked exactly like Claire had described: secluded, romantic, expensive, the kind of place couples went for anniversaries or honeymoons, not family Christmas celebrations. "I booked us for 4 nights, Marcus announced, spreading the brochures across the dining room table. "Christmas Eve through Sunday night. The place has everything we need. Full kitchen, wood-burning fireplace, even a game room with a pool table." "It looks beautiful," I said, studying the photos of rustic bedrooms and panoramic mountain views. How much did it cost? Marcus's smile faltered slightly. Don't worry about that. Consider it my Christmas gift to both of you. More money from our joint accounts. More marital assets being used to finance my own destruction. Every dollar Marcus spent on this cabin was another dollar I could claim in the divorce settlement. Another piece of evidence that he'd used our resources to facilitate his affair. We spent the evening planning what to pack and what groceries to buy for the cabin. Marcus suggested we stop at the liquor store and pick up champagne for Christmas morning, and Claire agreed enthusiastically. Champagne for their announcement, I realized. They were planning to toast their new relationship while I tried to process the end of my marriage. Friday morning, I met with Linda Chen one final time before our mountain trip. She'd compiled a comprehensive file of evidence that documented every aspect of Marcus and Claire's relationship, from their first documented meeting outside our house, to their furniture shopping expedition to their apartment visit. This is ironclad, Linda assured me, flipping through photographs and financial records. Any divorce attorney would be thrilled to work with evidence this thorough. What about the cabin trip? Should I try to get out of it? Absolutely not. If they're planning to confess during this trip, we want that confession on record. I'll set you up with a small recording device, something you can wear that will capture their exact words when they tell you about the affair. Linda showed me a device that looked like a small pin, the kind of thing you might wear on a sweater or jacket without anyone noticing. It would record up to 8 hours of audio and could be activated with a simple touch. The key is to let them do most of the talking, Linda explained. Don't get angry, don't make accusations, just let them hang themselves with their own words. The more they explain and justify their actions, the better it will be for your case. I practiced activating the device until I could do it without looking, then clipped it to my jacket and tested the audio quality. When Linda played back my voice, it was crystal clear, good enough to be used as evidence in court proceedings. Are you ready for this? Linda asked as I prepared to leave. I've been ready since I found that receipt in his wallet. They think they're going to surprise me, but I'm the one with surprises. That afternoon, I packed for the mountain cabin trip with the methodical precision of someone preparing for battle. I included the recording device, extra batteries, copies of important documents, and even a small digital camera in case I needed to document anything visual. I also packed a bag with enough clothes and personal items to last several days, just in case I decided not to return to the house with Marcus and Claire. Friday evening, we loaded Marcus's truck with luggage, groceries, and Christmas presents. The presents were wrapped in cheerful paper and tied with ribbons, looking like any normal family's holiday preparations. Claire had even wrapped a gift for me, something small and rectangular that was probably jewelry or perfume, a final gesture of sisterly affection before she destroyed my life. As we prepared to leave Saturday morning, I took one last look around our house, the place where I'd been happy for 8 years before learning that it had all been built on lies. The Christmas tree we'd decorated together, the photos on the mantle of vacations and anniversaries, the kitchen where I'd cooked thousands of meals for a husband who was planning to leave me for my sister. This would probably be the last time I'd see this house as my home. By the time we returned from the mountains, everything would be different. Marcus and Claire would have confessed their relationship, and I would have revealed that I'd known about it all along. The careful domesticity we'd maintained for months would be shattered, replaced by lawyers and accusations, and the messy business of dividing a life into separate pieces. Ready for an adventure? Marcus asked, loading the last of our bags into the truck. More ready than you know, I replied, and climbed into the passenger seat for what I knew would be the most important car ride of my life. The drive to the mountains took 3 hours, winding through small towns and pine forests, as we climbed toward snow-covered peaks. Marcus and Claire kept up a steady stream of cheerful conversation, pointing out scenic views and discussing what we'd do first when we reached the cabin. They seemed genuinely excited, like children anticipating Christmas morning, which I supposed they were. I sat quietly in the passenger seat, watching the landscape change, and thinking about how different this trip would be from what they expected. They thought they were driving toward their new life together, but they were actually driving toward the systematic destruction of everything they'd built their plans on. The cabin was even more beautiful than the photographs had suggested, perched on a hillside with panoramic views of snow-covered valleys. It was exactly the kind of place where people fell in love, got engaged, started new chapters of their lives. Marcus and Claire were planning to use it as the setting for their confession, but I was planning to use it as the setting for their downfall. As we unloaded our bags and explored the cabin's amenities, I activated the recording device on my jacket and prepared to document the most important conversation of my life. Somewhere in this beautiful, isolated place, my husband and sister were going to tell me they'd been betraying me for months, and when they did, every word would be preserved as evidence that would ensure they paid the price for their deception. The mountain air was crisp and clean, filled with the scent of pine trees and the promise of snow. It was the perfect setting for a Christmas miracle, which was exactly what I was planning to give them. Just not the kind they expected. The cabin was everything the brochures had promised and more. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a pristine valley where snow clung to evergreen branches like powdered sugar. The main room featured a massive stone fireplace, leather furniture that looked like it belonged in a luxury ski lodge, and a kitchen with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. It was the kind of place where wealthy couples celebrated anniversaries, where proposals happened against backdrops of mountain sunsets. Marcus carried our bags upstairs while Claire and I explored the lower level, both of us making appropriate comments about how beautiful everything was. But I could see Claire mentally cataloging details, imagining herself living this kind of lifestyle permanently. She ran her fingers along the granite counters and tested the leather couch like she was shopping for her own future home. "This is incredible," she breathed, standing at the window wall and gazing out at the mountains. "I could stay here forever." "It is pretty spectacular," I agreed, wondering if she realized how telling that comment was. Claire had never been particularly interested in nature or mountain getaway. Her idea of the perfect vacation usually involved beaches and shopping, but apparently being with Marcus had changed her preferences. Or maybe she was just imagining how romantic this setting would be once I was no longer part of the picture. Marcus came back downstairs and immediately went to work building a fire, arranging kindling and logs with the kind of practiced efficiency that suggested he'd done this before. I wondered if he and Claire had taken other trips together, other romantic getaways, funded by our joint accounts while I was at work teaching multiplication tables to 8-year-olds. "Why don't we open some wine and watch the sunset?" Marcus suggested, already moving toward the kitchen. "We can start our vacation properly." It was barely 4 o'clock early for wine by most standards, but I could see the logic in their timing. A few glasses of wine would make their confession easier, would soften whatever reaction they expected from me. They probably thought I'd cry and ask for explanations, maybe even blame myself for not being a good enough wife to keep Marcus happy. Claire found wine glasses in the cabinet, while Marcus opened a bottle of red wine that cost more than I usually spent on groceries for a week. Another expense from our joint accounts, another piece of evidence for the divorce proceedings. They were literally making me pay for my own humiliation. We settled around the fireplace with our wine, and for a few minutes, it almost felt like the family vacation I'd originally thought we were taking. Marcus told stories about difficult customers at the shop, and Claire described some of the insurance claims she'd processed recently. Normal conversation, the kind we'd been having for months while they secretly planned my destruction. But I could feel the tension underneath their casual chatter. Marcus kept checking his watch, and Claire seemed to be waiting for some kind of signal. They had a timeline for their confession, probably planned down to the minute. Maybe they wanted to wait for sunset, or for us to finish the wine, or for some other romantic moment that would make their betrayal feel like a love story instead of a crime. "This is so peaceful," Claire said, curling up on the couch with her wine. "No work stress, no city noise, just us in the mountains." "It's perfect," Marcus agreed, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "I'm glad we decided to do this instead of the usual family Christmas chaos. The usual family Christmas chaos that would have included my parents, my aunts and uncles, my cousins and their children. The Christmas gathering where Marcus and Claire had originally planned to announce their relationship, surrounded by people who would have provided emotional support and witness protection. Instead, they'd isolated me in a remote cabin where I had no allies and no escape route. "We should take a picture," Claire suggested, pulling out her phone. "Something to remember this trip by." She insisted on taking several photos of the three of us together, arranging us in different configurations around the fireplace. Marcus and me on the couch with Claire standing behind us. All three of us sitting on the hearth, me and Claire together while Marcus worked the camera. Each photo was a documentation of our last moments as a family, though they didn't know I understood that yet. As the afternoon wore on and the wine disappeared, Marcus and Claire grew more animated, more affectionate with each other in subtle ways. A shared laugh that lasted too long. Claire's hand resting on Marcus's shoulder when she walked behind his chair. Marcus complimenting Claire's sweater in a tone that was too intimate for a brother-in-law. Around 6 o'clock, Marcus suggested we start thinking about dinner. The cabin's kitchen was fully stocked, and we'd brought groceries for several elaborate meals. But instead of immediately starting to cook, Marcus and Claire exchanged a meaningful look that told me the moment was approaching. Actually, Claire said, setting down her empty wine glass, there's something we need to talk to you about first. Here it was, the confession they'd been planning for weeks, maybe months. The carefully rehearsed explanation that would destroy my marriage and my relationship with my sister in one conversation. I touched the recording device on my jacket, making sure it was still activated, and prepared to document my own destruction. Okay, I said, trying to sound curious rather than prepared. What's on your mind? Marcus and Claire looked at each other again, some silent communication passing between them about who should speak first. Marcus cleared his throat and leaned forward in his chair, adopting the serious expression he usually reserved for discussions about major purchases or household problems. Karen, you know how much we both care about you, he began, and I almost laughed at the predictable opening. They were going to frame this as concern for my well-being, like breaking my heart was actually an act of kindness. Of course, I said, settling back on the couch and giving them my full attention. Over the past few months, Claire and I have gotten closer, Marcus continued. Not intentionally, and not in a way that either of us planned or want, but sometimes feelings develop that are stronger than what we think we should feel. Claire nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears that I was sure were completely genuine. She probably did feel terrible about what they were doing, even as she was unable to stop herself from doing. We've tried to fight it, Claire added, her voice barely above a whisper. We both love you so much, and the last thing either of us ever wanted was to hurt you. But we can't keep pretending that nothing is happening between us. I let them continue, watching their faces as they delivered the speech they'd obviously practiced. Marcus talked about how guilty he felt, how he'd never intended to fall in love with my sister. Claire described the agony of living in our house while being in love with my husband, the torture of watching us together while knowing she was destroying our marriage. They were both crying now, real tears that made their confession feel more like a tragedy than a betrayal. They presented themselves as victims of their own emotions, two people who had been overwhelmed by a love they couldn't control. There was no mention of the apartment they'd rented together, the furniture they'd bought, the $18,000 they'd spent from our joint account. This was the sanitized version of their affair, the romantic narrative that absolved them of responsibility. We know this is going to hurt you, Marcus said, reaching for my hand. And we know you have every right to hate us, but we also know that we can't keep living this lie. It's not fair to you, and it's not fair to us. We want to be together, Claire added, finally meeting my eyes. We want to try to build something real, something honest, but we needed you to hear it from us, together, before we took any steps to make that happen. I sat quietly for a moment, letting their words settle in the air between us. They were waiting for my reaction, probably expecting tears and accusations, and demands for explanation. Instead, I reached for the wine bottle and poured myself another glass, taking my time, and considering my response. How long? I asked finally. Marcus and Claire exchanged another look. How long what? Marcus asked. How long have you been sleeping together? The blunt question clearly caught them off guard. They'd probably expected me to ask about feelings and emotions, not physical intimacy. Claire's face flushed red, and Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. It's not just about sex, Claire said defensively. This is about real feelings, about love. I didn't ask what it was about, I said calmly. I asked how long you've been sleeping together. Marcus cleared his throat again. Since October. 3 months of active betrayal. 3 months of them using our guest room and our bed. and probably every other surface in our house while I was at work or asleep. 3 months of lies and deception, and stolen moments, while I cooked their meals, and washed their laundry, and played the role of the oblivious wife. "And the apartment?" I asked. Both of them went very still. "What apartment?" Claire asked, but her voice was too high, too defensive. "The one on Westfield Avenue. The one where you bought a mattress on Wednesday." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus and Claire stared at me with growing horror as they realized I knew far more than they'd expected. Their carefully planned confession was falling apart, replaced by the much uglier reality of being caught in a web of lies. "How do you know about that?" Marcus asked, his voice barely audible. "Because I followed you. I've been following you for days, watching you shop for furniture and plan your new life together while pretending to care about my feelings." Claire started crying harder, but these weren't the sympathetic tears of someone confessing to a painful but inevitable love affair. These were the desperate tears of someone who'd been caught red-handed and was beginning to understand the consequences. "It's not what you think," Marcus said, but he sounded defeated rather than convincing. "Really? Then explain it to me. Explain the $18,000 you've spent from our joint accounts. Explain the credit cards I didn't know existed. Explain why you've been lying to my face for months while planning to leave me for my sister." Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was no explanation that would make any of this acceptable, and he seemed to be realizing that for the first time, "We were going to pay you back," Claire said weakly. "Once the divorce was final and we sorted out the finances, we were going to make sure you got your fair share." "My fair share?" I stood up, pacing to the window and back. "My fair share of the money you stole to finance your affair. My fair share of the house I helped buy with my grandmother's inheritance. My fair share of the marriage I thought was real." "Karen, please," Marcus said, standing up and moving toward me. "We know we handled this badly. We know we should have told you sooner, should have been honest from the beginning." "You should have been honest?" I laughed. A sound that had no humor in it. "Marcus, you forged my signature on loan documents. You opened credit cards without telling me. You've been using our money to set up a life with another woman while I trusted you to manage our finances. This isn't about honesty. This is about theft." The word hung in the air between us like a physical presence. Theft. Not an affair, not a love story, not a tragic case of hearts wanting what they couldn't have. Theft. Of money. Theft. Of trust. Theft. Of the life I'd thought we were building together. Claire was sobbing now, collapsed on the couch with her face in her hands. "I never wanted it to happen like this," she kept saying. "I never wanted to hurt you like this." "But you did want to hurt me," I said, walking over to stand in front of her. "Maybe not in this specific way, but you wanted my husband and you were willing to do whatever it took to get him, including stealing from me, lying to me, and planning to humiliate me at Christmas dinner." "We weren't going to humiliate you," Marcus protested. "We were going to tell everyone that we'd grown apart, that the divorce was mutual. After spending months using my money to furnish your love nest, after letting me cook your meals and wash your clothes while you planned my replacement. That's not mutual, Marcus. That's exploitation." I walked back to the kitchen and poured myself another glass of wine, taking my time and letting them sit with the weight of what I'd just revealed. They'd thought they were in control of this conversation, but I'd just demonstrated that I knew everything they thought they'd hidden from me. "What do you want?" Marcus asked finally. "What do you want us to do?" It was the first intelligent question he'd asked all evening. What did I want? I wanted my marriage back, but that was impossible now. I wanted my sister back, but that was equally impossible. I wanted the money they'd stolen, the security they'd destroyed, the trust they'd shattered. Some of those things I could get back through legal action. Others were gone forever. "I want you to understand that this isn't a romantic love story," I said. "This is a crime. You've committed fraud, theft, and adultery. You've used marital assets to finance an extramarital relationship. You've violated my trust, my financial security, and my basic human dignity." Claire looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. "Does that mean you're going to press charges?" "It means I'm going to divorce your boyfriend and sue both of you for every penny you've stolen from me. It means..." I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of people you really are. Marcus sat down heavily in his chair, finally beginning to understand the scope of the disaster they'd created. Karen, we can work this out. We don't need lawyers and lawsuits. We can divide everything fairly. Fairly? I set down my wine glass and stared at him. You mean the way you fairly included me in your decision to spend $18,000 on your girlfriend? The way you fairly consulted me before renting an apartment for your new life together? We'll pay it back, he said desperately. Every penny. We'll sell the apartment, return the furniture, cancel the lease, whatever it takes to make this right. It's too late for that, I said. You made your choices, and now you get to live with the consequences. The next few hours passed in a blur of accusations, explanations, and desperate bargaining. Marcus and Claire alternated between trying to justify their actions and begging for forgiveness, but nothing they said could undo the months of deception and betrayal. They tried to convince me that their love was real, that it wasn't just about sex or excitement, or the thrill of doing something forbidden. They claimed they'd tried to resist their feelings, that they'd genuinely struggled with the morality of what they were doing. Marcus even suggested that our marriage had been in trouble long before Claire moved in, that this affair was a symptom of deeper problems rather than the cause of them. But every explanation they offered just made their betrayal feel more calculated, more deliberate. They'd had months to consider the consequences of their actions, months to find honest ways to address whatever problems existed in our marriage. Instead, they'd chosen deception and theft, using my trust and my money to finance their romantic fantasy. Around 10 o'clock, Claire announced that she was going to bed, unable to handle any more confrontation. She climbed the stairs to one of the guest bedrooms, leaving Marcus and me alone by the dying fire. I know you hate me right now, Marcus said, staring into the flame, and I know I deserve it. But I need you to understand that I never meant for any of this to happen. What did you think would happen when you started sleeping with my sister? I asked. Did you think I'd never find out? Did you think I'd just accept it when you were ready to tell me? I thought maybe we could handle it like adults. I thought maybe you'd understand that sometimes people fall out of love, and it's better to be honest about it than to stay in a marriage that isn't working. Our marriage was working fine until you decided to destroy it. We had problems, sure, but we also had 8 years of history and love and shared dreams. You threw all of that away for a few months of excitement with my sister. Marcus was quiet for a long time, and when he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. What happens now? Now you sleep on the couch, and tomorrow we drive back to town. I'm filing for divorce on Monday, and I'm hiring a forensic accountant to trace every penny you've stolen. You and Claire can move into your apartment together and start your new life, but you're going to pay for the privilege. And us, is there any chance we can work through this? I looked at him sitting there in the firelight, this man I'd loved and trusted and built a life with. He looked older than he had that morning, worn down by guilt and the realization that his carefully planned affair had become a legal and financial disaster. There is no us anymore, Marcus. You destroyed that when you chose to betray me instead of talking to me about whatever problems you thought we had. He nodded, accepting the finality in my voice. I'm sorry, he said. I know that doesn't mean anything now, but I am genuinely sorry for hurting you. I'm sure you are, I said, standing up and heading for the stairs. But sorry doesn't give me back the life you stole from me. I left him sitting by the fire and climbed the stairs to the master bedroom, the room that was supposed to be mine, and Marcus's for this romantic mountain getaway. Instead, I was sleeping alone while my husband spent the night on the couch, and my sister cried herself to sleep in a guest room. As I got ready for bed, I replayed the evening's conversation in my mind, checking to make sure the recording device had captured everything important. Their confession, their admissions about the money and the apartment, their desperate attempts to justify their actions, all of it was now documented evidence that would strengthen my position in the divorce proceeding. I lay in the king-sized bed, staring up at the cathedral ceiling and listening to the wind in the pine trees outside. This cabin was supposed to be the setting for their triumph, the place where they'd finally come clean about their relationship and start their new life together. Instead, it had become the scene of their downfall, the place where I'd revealed that their secret affair was actually a well-documented crime. Tomorrow was Christmas Eve, and instead of exchanging gifts and sharing holiday traditions, we'd be driving back to a city where lawyers and accountants were waiting to dismantle the life Marcus and Claire had tried to steal from me. They thought they'd been so clever, so careful in their planning, but they'd underestimated the woman they were betraying, and now they were going to pay the price for that mistake. I fell asleep to the sound of Marcus moving around downstairs, probably trying to find blankets and pillows for the couch. Let him be uncomfortable for one night. In a few days, he'd be sleeping in that expensive apartment with my sister, but he'd be paying for it with money that belonged to both of us, and every month he'd be reminded of what his betrayal had cost him. Christmas morning dawned gray and cold, with snow falling steadily outside the cabin windows. Under normal circumstances, it would have been a perfect Christmas card scene, the kind of winter wonderland that made people believe in magic and second chances. Instead, it felt like the end of the world. Marcus was already awake when I came downstairs, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the defeated expression of a man who'd realized his life was about to change dramatically. Claire emerged from her room a few minutes later, her eyes swollen from crying and her hair uncombed. "Merry Christmas," I said brightly, and both of them flinched at the cheerfulness in my voice. We packed in silence, loading our bags back into Marcus's truck with none of the excited chatter that had marked our arrival. The cabin that had seemed so beautiful and romantic 2 days ago now felt like a crime scene, a place where confessions had been made and consequences had been revealed. The drive home was the longest 3 hours of my life. Marcus focused on the winding mountain roads with grim determination, while Claire stared out the passenger window at the passing scenery. I sat in the back seat, watching the mountains disappear behind us and thinking about the new life I was about to build from the ashes of my marriage. When we finally pulled into our driveway, the house looked different, some smaller, shabbier, like a place that belonged to strangers rather than the home I'd shared with Marcus for 4 years. The Christmas decorations I'd hung myself looked garish and false, celebration for a family that no longer exists. Marcus carried our bags inside without speaking, and Claire disappeared into her room immediately. I stood in the living room, looking at the Christmas tree we'd decorated together just a week ago, and realized that this was probably the last time I'd see this house as anything other than a piece of property to be divided in divorce proceeding. My phone buzzed with a text message from Linda Chen. "Hope your Christmas was revealing. Call me when you're ready to proceed." I smiled for the first time in days. Christmas had indeed been revealing, in ways that Marcus and Claire could never have anticipated. They'd thought they were finally coming clean about their relationship, but they'd actually provided me with everything I needed to destroy them in court. I walked upstairs to pack the belongings I'd need for the next phase of my life, leaving Marcus and Claire to figure out how to explain to their families why Christmas had been canceled and why I was suddenly moving out of my own house. They'd wanted honesty. They were about to get more honesty than they'd bargained for. Starting tomorrow, the whole world would know exactly what kind of people they really were. Monday morning arrived with the crisp efficiency of a business day, and I was ready. While Marcus dragged himself to work and Claire called in sick to her insurance job, I was sitting in Patricia Williams' office at 9 sharp, armed with recordings, photographs, and a determination that surprised even me. "This is extraordinary evidence," Patricia said, reviewing the files Linda Chen had compiled. "I've been practicing family law for 20 years, and I've rarely seen a case this well documented. Your husband essentially confessed to everything on tape." The recording from the cabin was crystal clear, Marcus admitting the affair started in October, Claire acknowledging the apartment, both of them stumbling through explanations about the money they'd spent. Their voices sounded different when played back in a lawyer's office, less romantic and more criminal. "What kind of settlement can we expect?" I asked. "Given the evidence of adultery and financial misconduct, I'm confident we can secure a very favorable division of assets. The house, the retirement accounts, even reimbursement for the money spent on the affair. Your husband may try to negotiate, but his position is essentially indefensible." Patricia explained the timeline for filing papers, serving Marcus with divorce documents, and beginning the discovery process. She recommended moving quickly before Marcus and Claire had time to hide assets or coordinate their legal strategy. "I want to file today," I said, "and I want them served tomorrow." "That's aggressive," but given their behavior, probably why. They've already proven they can't be trusted to act in good faith. By noon, the divorce papers were filed with the court. By 2 o'clock, a process server was on his way to Marcus's shop with official documentation that would end our marriage and begin the legal battle for our asset. I spent the afternoon opening my own bank account, changing passwords on shared accounts, and consulting with a realtor about listing the house. Marcus came home that evening, looking like he'd been hit by a truck. The process server had found him at work, handing him the divorce papers in front of his colleagues and customers. Whatever sympathy he might have expected from his co-workers had evaporated when they learned he was being divorced for adultery with his wife's sister. "We need to talk," he said, finding me in the kitchen where I was calmly preparing dinner for one. "No, we don't. We need to communicate through our attorneys from now on. Karen, please, don't make this uglier than it has to be." I turned to face him, taking in his rumpled work clothes and defeated expression. "I didn't make this ugly, Marcus. You did that when you decided to steal from me to fund your affair with my sister." Claire appeared in the doorway, looking pale and frightened. She'd obviously been crying, and her hands shook as she clutched a tissue. "I'm moving out," she announced. "Tonight. I can't stay here anymore." "Good," I said. "Your boyfriend can help you move your things to the apartment you've already rented together." The next few hours were a blur of boxes, accusations, and desperate attempts at negotiation. Marcus tried repeatedly to convince me to settle privately, to avoid the publicity and expense of a contentious divorce. Claire alternated between apologizing and defending their relationship, as if the sincerity of their feelings could somehow justify the months of deception. "We'll pay back every penny," Marcus promised as he loaded Claire's belongings into his truck. "You don't need to destroy us financially over this. You destroyed yourselves financially," I replied. "I'm just making sure you face the consequence." They left together that night, driving away from the house we'd all shared toward their new life in the apartment they'd furnished with my money. I watched from the living room window as their taillights disappeared down our street, then poured myself a glass of wine and called Jessica. "It's over," I told her. "They're gone. The papers are filed, and in 6 months I'll be officially divorced." "How do you feel?" I considered the question, sitting alone in my living room, surrounded by the remnants of Christmas decorations and the echoes of 8 years of marriage. "Free," I said finally. "For the first time in months, maybe years, I feel completely free." The divorce proceedings moved swiftly, helped by the overwhelming evidence of Marcus's financial misconduct and adultery. His attorney tried various strategies, claiming the affair was brief and meaningless, suggesting that I was vindictive and unreasonable, arguing that the money spent on Claire was minimal and would be repaid. None of it worked. The recordings, photographs, and financial records painted a clear picture of systematic deception and theft. Marcus had used marital assets to establish a second household with another woman, all while lying to his wife about their financial situation. In February, we reached a settlement that gave me 70% of our marital assets, including the house, most of the retirement savings, and reimbursement for the money spent on the affair. Marcus would keep his business and his truck, but he'd be paying alimony for 3 years and covering all of my legal fees. "Your ex-husband is not happy with these terms," Patricia informed me after the final negotiation session. "His attorney says he feels like he's being punished for falling in love." "He's not being punished for falling in love," I said. "He's being punished for theft, fraud, and adultery. There's a difference." The house sold in March to a young couple expecting their first child. They loved the garden I'd planted and the kitchen where I'd cooked thousands of meals for a husband who was planning to leave me. I signed the papers without sentimentality, using the proceeds to buy a small condo near downtown and invest the remainder in accounts that only I could access. Claire tried to contact me several times during those months, sending texts and leaving voicemails that I never answered. She wanted to explain, to apologize, to somehow repair the relationship we'd once shared, but there was nothing to repair. She'd made her choice when she decided my husband was worth more than my trust. I heard through mutual acquaintances that their relationship didn't survive the financial and legal pressures of the divorce. Marcus blamed Claire for encouraging the affair, while Claire blamed Marcus for mismanaging the money and getting them caught. By spring, they were fighting constantly about money, both of them struggling with the debt and legal fees their betrayal had generated. They broke up in May, less than 6 months after their romantic Christmas confession. Claire moved back in with our parents, claiming she needed time to figure out her life. Marcus started dating a woman from his bowling league, apparently having learned nothing about the importance of honesty in relationships. I learned all of this through Jessica, who maintained friendships with people in their social circle. I listened to the updates with the detached interest of someone following a soap opera rather than the wreckage of relationships that had once been central to my life. By summer I had settled into a routine that felt entirely my own. I taught summer school to earn extra money, traveled to Europe for 2 weeks with Jessica, and started taking art classes at the community college. The watercolor painting I'd always talked about but never pursued became a passion that filled my evenings and weekends. One Saturday morning in August I was at the farmer's market when I saw Claire across the plaza, standing at a vegetable stand with our mother. She looked older, thinner, like someone who'd learned hard lessons about the cost of getting everything you think you want. Our eyes met briefly across the crowd, and I saw her start to move in my direction. I turned and walked away, not from anger or hurt, but from simple disinterest. Claire was a chapter of my life that had ended, and I had no desire to reread pages I'd already closed. That evening I sat on my condo balcony with a glass of wine and one of my watercolor paintings, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, probably Claire, trying once again to force a conversation I didn't want to have. I deleted the message without reading it and turned off my phone. Whatever Claire wanted to say, whatever explanation or apology she thought might bridge the gap between us, I wasn't interested. She'd had her chance to be my sister, and she'd chosen to be my betrayer instead. The next morning I woke up in my sunny bedroom, made coffee in my quiet kitchen, and planned a day that belonged entirely to me. No husband to accommodate, no sister to worry about, no marriage to maintain through sheer force of will and willful blindness. Jessica called around noon, laughing about something she'd seen at the mall. "Guess who I ran into at Victoria's Secret," she said. "Your ex-husband, buying lingerie for his new girlfriend. Same size small, same red lace. Apparently he has a I laughed, genuinely amused by the circular nature of Marcus's romantic life. Some people never learn. "Are you okay hearing about him?" "I'm fine," I said, and realized I meant it completely. He's not my problem anymore, and he wasn't. None of them were. I'd spent months learning that the worst betrayal wasn't what Marcus and Claire had done to me, but what I'd done to myself by ignoring the signs, making excuses and prioritizing their comfort over my own well-being. Now I lived in a space that was entirely mine, surrounded by art I'd created, and books I'd chosen, and silence that felt like peace rather than loneliness. I had friends who supported me, work that fulfilled me, and dreams that belonged to no one but myself. The woman who had found a receipt in her husband's wallet and thought her world was ending had been wrong. Her world hadn't ended, it had been reborn. And the new world was so much better than the old one, that she couldn't imagine why she'd fought so hard to save something that had never really been worth saving. On Christmas morning, exactly 1 year after the mountain cabin confrontation that had changed everything, I woke up in my own bed, in my own home, and felt grateful for every choice that had led me to this moment of perfect, peaceful solitude. I made coffee, opened a few gifts from friends, and spent the morning painting a winter landscape that looked nothing like the mountains where my marriage had finally died. This painting was full of light and possibility, a scene where spring was just beginning to emerge from winter's grip. Later I would drive to Jessica's house for dinner with friends, who had become my chosen family. We would laugh and share stories and toast to another year of growth and independence. But for now I sat in my sunny living room, surrounded by the life I'd built from the ashes of betrayal, and marveled at how beautiful freedom could be. Marcus and Claire had thought they were taking everything from me, when they stole my marriage and my money, and my trust. Instead, they'd given me the greatest gift imaginable, the chance to discover who I really was when I stopped trying to be who everyone else needed me to be. And who I really was, it turned out, was magnificent. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.